Welcome to the Autistic Me podcast. I'm Christopher Scott Wyatt, speaking as the Autistic Me. This week, I want to address education, one of the three topics about which I receive the most questions. I could write a book about my experiences as a student and educator. I've started just such a project several times, and each time I've decided such a book isn't helpful, since it is one failure after another. There's a lot more to say than what follows, but it's enough to remind people that education is no better than any other path for an autistic individual. I'd argue education is difficult for any disabled person. Higher education is particularly uninviting and unsupportive. The assumption is that because I have completed various degrees, I must have mastered how to succeed in higher education. The reality is more complex. Yes, I do have 2 terminal degrees, a doctorate and a Master of Fine Arts. But the journey towards those degrees was fraught with academic and social failures. I would argue that one reason I completed my degrees was something economists call a sunk opportunity cost. The sunk cost fallacy is once you start paying for something, you reach a point you just keep paying and keep investing, hoping for something to change. We see this in the United States when we invest in a foreign war and we reach a point at which we say, well, gee, we've already invested so much, we can't stop now. This idea that I've gone so far towards my career pursuit in education, I cannot stop investing towards this dream of working in education as a teacher. So the sunk cost fallacy is one reason why I have these degrees. It has very little to do with being reasonable or analyzing the situations as well as I should. It has taken me 32 years to realize that I am a victim of this sunk cost fallacy. I did not complete some of the programs I attempted. In several instances, I departed universities out of frustration. To this day, I regret being unable to complete degree programs I had hoped would lead me into a stable career. I have not had, and I am unlikely now to have, a genuine career. Employment failures resemble my struggles in academic settings, which require the same social and organizational skills as a workplace. And so I want listeners and readers to know that what they consider to be academic success actually reflects a series of desperate attempts to find a community and career in which I might feel comfortable and somewhat welcomed. I remember a teacher in Bakersfield where I started school calling my family trailer park trash, and that has remained with me. Technically, we did live in 2 mobile home parks when I was young. When we moved to Ivanhoe, California, a small town known for its poverty. I was well aware of the differences between living in Ivanhoe and living in the better, also rural but suburban neighborhood of Oak Ranch. I've known since first grade that I enjoy writing and creating things, but like most people, my career interests changed from writing to science to technology. The interests merged when I realized I could write about science and technology, and then use technology to create media. I've written before about my shift into the mentally gifted minors and then what was called the Gifted and Talented Education Program within Visalia Unified. Simply moving from one city to another, from one school district to another, led to significant label changes. I went from receiving one type of supports for struggling students to receiving supports for being gifted. Often students rise to meet expectations, and I'd like to imagine I did better because it was expected of me. The resource specialist for the elementary school introduced me to the Apple and Atari computers. Eventually, I would own a Commodore VIC-20, a Timex Sinclair, and 2 IBM-compatible computers, a Tandy 1000 and an Epson AT. I want to say that I received those from my grandparents, my parents, and that without that generosity, I would not have been able to express myself via technology. Technology was extremely expensive, and I owe a lot to my family for supporting my interest in technology during the 1980s. Computers make sense to me, even when people do not. I learned to program because I wanted to create more things with the computer. I coded text editors, art programs, and even simple music using the basic programming language and then assembly programming languages. People do forget that technology was rare in the 1970s and early 80s. Personal computers became common only when I was in high school with the release of the IBM PC XT and the Apple IIe. Though I might have seemed normal or okay to adults, I knew I wasn't particularly liked by peers. Interestingly, a young girl, a fifth grader when I was in the sixth grade, ran a campaign that helped elect me school president. I thought this meant I might have more friends or be more liked in some way. But if anything, being student body president in sixth grade made the isolation of junior high even harder to ignore. I often feel that it was something of an inside joke that I ended up president, and it certainly didn't lead to anything beyond that. It was my one and only foray into student or any form of politics. Younger kids had liked me and voted for me, while my peers in 5th and 6th grade considered me helplessly weird. Even worse, at that time, I didn't know how to relate to the young girl who had managed to get me elected. She was really nice, and so of course I didn't know how to get to know her or show her any respect. I just took everything for granted. She did the impossible, even if it became something of a joke. She managed to get me elected president, and I didn't know how to thank her, and I didn't even know that I should thank her. It was difficult for me as a student. More accurately, I was a difficult student. I would speak up when a teacher made a mistake, and that happened more than it probably should have. My parents were told I might not amount to much, and school was a challenge because I was smart and socially inept at best, even with teachers. High school was a social struggle. I didn't go to prom or seriously date. I struggled with depression and skipped more classes than my parents probably realize. There were a lot of things that I did that, looking back, I understand now. I would skip class and get donuts, or I'd skip class and just sit outside somewhere. Class for me was very difficult, not just because I felt alone, but I felt that I didn't understand the social structures. And I know that's not unusual, especially for junior high and high school students, but I had students actually calling me names and taunting me, and I know that it was because I was physically and emotionally different. I wore a back brace, I walked funny, I do have the one shorter or seemingly shorter and partially paralyzed arm. I run funny, I walk kind of with a strange gait because of the paralysis and other things. And so students are attracted to someone who is different like that. You become a target. And I felt like a bigger and bigger target until I found a handful of people I could sit with and talk to during lunch without being teased or bullied. The value of mentors cannot be overstated. I need those people who will remind me to do things I dislike so I can later do what I love. Though I prefer to be alone ignoring the world, you cannot do that and succeed. Something I still recognize as an adult. I need to get out and promote myself as a writer, as a programmer, as a web developer, even as a creative artist. But it's difficult for me and for a lot of people like me to get out and do the marketing to be a successful freelancer, which would let me sit at home and work alone. So usually you can't make a go of it without some social skills. And I don't have very good social skills. Finding journalism helped. I could write and use my technical skills, So I helped set up the computer labs at the high school and configure the software. I could be a geek and a writer without a lot of polite social interaction. One thing I've learned is that being a reporter or being a host of either this podcast or a few television shows locally, I can ask questions, I can be direct, and it's a very different approach than a social gathering where you have to engage in small talk and politeness. So I found journalism to be a great outlet for a personality that is direct, wants information, and then writes about that information. So other people were better reporters, and I wasn't the best writer, usually because I would rush. But I was good enough that journalism gave me a plan for college. When I entered college, I assumed I would be a technology or business reporter and use technology in the workplace. Computer science was more theoretical and mainframe focused in the 1980s. That wasn't appealing to me. I was interested in the emerging personal technologies. So I focused on journalism. I added an English degree when I learned that to teach journalism in California, you needed an English education credential. Teaching was supposed to be a safety net at first, just in case I didn't go into journalism. But by my senior year, teaching journalism became my career path. The only reason I managed to complete my undergraduate degrees was that I was in the honors program at the University of Southern California. The honors housing, which was known as faculty and residence, meant that I had a stable community and faculty mentors to help me navigate the foreign world of the university. I also found comfort working at the University Computing Services. That's where I could learn all about the IBM mainframes, the Sun workstations, and dozens of programming languages. I learned more at work than in classes, and even though I was more interested in personal technology, at work they were using the mainframes and the mini computers in very practical ways. Plus, I was just in awe of the technology. Even the tape librarian robot, which could move the cartridges for the mainframe and mini computers. Back then, software was often stored on tape. And so this robot in a enclosed housing would spin around, grab a tape, and put it in the tape deck. It was incredibly fascinating to watch, and it gave me a sense of the power of the mainframe through this visual metaphor of this fast spinning robot grabbing and moving tapes into and out of tape decks back into their libraries with barcodes. It was an amazing sight. And it made me just stay around the computing center even when I wasn't officially at work, learning more and more and more about technology. I had two really great mentors at work, and that was another reason I was able to complete the 2 undergraduate degrees. At work, I was reminded of the value of any degree. Most of the programmers didn't have technology degrees. They had studied fields including philosophy, classics, art, and music. So to be a computer geek, you didn't need the computer degree, and that was a revelation. I could do something I loved and be good at it without the academic credentials. Unfortunately, that has changed a lot over the last 30 years, and now people will ask, well, do you have a degree in user interface design? Do you have a degree in software development? And that has posed a problem. But I finished the undergraduate degrees in December of 1990. My goal was to complete the teaching credential that spring. Unfortunately, sadly, I did not finish the teacher education program. I came within 2 courses, 2 of completing the credential, and I regret not doing so to this day. I would have been a teacher in 1991, and I would have had a 30-year career by now. Instead, I had a conflict with the professor overseeing student teachers. My high school journalism instructor was about to take a sabbatical for a documentary project. He was going to hike and film the Pacific Crest Trail, and I hoped to take his place for the year while finishing my studies. And I would drive once a week back down to Los Angeles to complete the coursework. And I had worked this out with my high school and with USC, I believed. But my conflict with the USC School of Education was largely because the professor who oversaw student teaching said I was too rigid and too formal. She wrote that I was unlikely to connect with students, even though I knew my subject materials and I knew all the theory of teaching, what is called pedagogy. So I knew my subjects and I knew the theory of teaching, but in her view, I was not ready to enter a classroom. Instead of trying to negotiate and instead of trying to argue that I should be allowed to prove my abilities, I got frustrated with her attitude and her insults, and I drove home. So I felt insulted and hurt that someone would say I shouldn't teach because of my personality. My personality, I hope, has improved, and I hope I'm better with people, but I still believe it was unfair to say that because I called students sir and ma'am and showed them some deference, which I thought worked well for me, I still believe judging me based on her standards of what worked for her as a teacher was unfair of that professor. And even to this day, as a university instructor, I do use a different approach to relating to students that is formal, but I hope shows them also that I respect their knowledge and what they bring to me. So after leaving USC, I did take the temporary teaching post, filling in for my former journalism instructor, but the work at USC was largely wasted. I went from being 8 weeks from earning a credential to having to start over. Now I had to enroll in another education program at a satellite campus of another university while teaching. That's how I entered my second university. My goal became teaching and earning the degree in education so I could continue doing what I was loving, which was journalism and photography, yearbook. It was media production, and it's what I still love and prefer. Unfortunately, instead of staying in the temporary post, I was offered and accepted a permanent post at another high school and in another school district for the fall of 1991. That post fell apart pretty quickly after conflicts with my assigned mentor at the high school. He was popular, but he was abusive towards me in some of the way that he approached me, and he was inappropriate towards students. He said things about students that shouldn't have been said, particularly some incidences with female students that bothered me. Maybe they shouldn't have. He was popular. He was award-winning. And I tried to do everything he asked, and then I realized he was asking me to do his work. Times have changed a lot since then, thankfully, but I resigned the position, unable to continue what was becoming a very toxic environment, at least for me. There were other problems after I left, so I understand that my reaction was probably more extreme than how a typical person would react, but I've now been conditioned to take only so much bullying before I understand it's going to get worse. From high school, from college, I have started to catalog things, and I understand that when someone is pushing in certain ways or saying certain things, it's not going to get better. And in education, there is a lot of bullying. There's a lot of bullying from people in power and people who are insecure. So I have concluded that it is often best to avoid those conflicts, either hiding away in my office and trying to just do my job in my classroom, or understanding that I will need to change a class or change a situation. Maybe it is something unique to some of these teachers. I wonder if they want to be popular because in some ways they weren't popular. I certainly wasn't a popular student or popular off campus, but I don't teach for popularity. I teach because I really love media. I really love journalism and photography, film and television and audio production. I really love those things, and I don't expect students to love me in return. I expect them to enjoy my enthusiasm for the subject, not social connections with them that I'm not always able to make. So what I found in my first so-called permanent teaching job was one of these bullies who talked like the students, acted like the students, and it felt very uncomfortable and too familiar to me. So when the administration suggested that it be best I move on and give that some thought, that's what I did. I resigned and tried to find something else to do. So there I was with yet more educational coursework completed and no job. I left the graduate program of the satellite campus of this university I was enrolled at, feeling worse than I did when I left USC. Now I had failed twice to clear my credential to become a high school teacher. So that was two very rough failures and a pattern that, as you will see, has continued. In the years ahead, I would try 2 more teaching credential programs. I left both programs unable to do the same work I had done twice before. I understand there are residency requirements at universities, and they want to ensure some quality within degree and credential programs. But I wish there had been more flexibility. Doing the same thing again and again and again was just so discouraging and so heartbreaking. To pay for it, to sit there and repeat the work. Taking courses that aren't of interest to me isn't easy as it is, and taking the same courses twice or 3 or 4 times, that just proved impossible. I tried a graduate program in journalism, and I really wanted to succeed in that program. That would have taken me back all the way to my original goal of being a journalist, and at that time, there was something of a renaissance even among newspapers. The San Jose Mercury News had expanded. The Los Angeles Times was doing multiple editions. Everything seemed to be going really well, and I really wanted to get back into that career path. Unfortunately, I was older than the other students, and I felt incredibly isolated away from friends and family. A residential life advisor, what they call an RA, came to me and told me that other students felt uncomfortable with my late night walks around campus. I was told within the journalism program that I made other students uncomfortable. They considered me creepy and weird. And I was driving back and forth between Southern California and Central California trying to succeed with what supports I could get from friends and family, but my body gave out. I was in a lot of pain. I was emotionally exhausted. And once again, I exited a graduate program. The depression that followed was really severe, but I had no idea what to do next. None. I did make another attempt at a teaching credential at the same university at which I had completed the 2 graduate courses while teaching at that high school where things had gone wrong. I quickly became just disgusted with the low quality of instruction and even the lower quality of students with whom I found myself. So now I had tried 5 times to become a high school journalism teacher. And the 5th time, that was obviously it. you could say because it was the same university, that was actually 4 attempts at a California high school teaching credential. Nothing was working out. And I was 30 years old with nothing. 30. No career, no practical college degree. Print journalism was clearly starting to fade. The English education degree was an education degree without an education credential. And I had not completed a computer-related degree, even though that's what I'm good at. So emotionally, I was a mess. The toll that it took on my relationships was severe. I was good at school, sometimes. At least I was good at school work. I was a good teacher and a complete failure at jumping through the hoops to become a credentialed high school teacher. And I lacked the patience of a typical person to recognize that, hey, repeating a course, at least it should have been an easy A. So it was at that time that I decided to seek help from a therapist who said that he specialized in educational supports. Neither the talk therapy nor the medications helped. I was put on a mix of medications for ADD, ADHD, for focus and concentration, also received some additional treatments for pain and pain management as well as migraines. If anything, my relationships just deteriorated more, along with my self-esteem. Now I was relying on pills to get through the day, and I nearly lost every friendship. And more importantly, I nearly lost the friendship of the one person who's been with me through all of these misadventures. The person who is now my wife. I was just horrible. Technically, I did lose her. We married when I was not at my best. And we married in some ways, I think, just to say we were married at a particular point in life in our, as we turned 30. And we promptly divorced because I wanted her, and still sometimes want her, to find someone better. She is a better person than me. She's a better student. She's a better employee. She's probably a better parent than me. She is just a lot better than I am. And I really don't always like myself. And at that point, I hated myself. And the psychologist was telling me I was in the wrong relationships, probably for the wrong reasons, and I needed to find that so-called right relationship that would somehow make me a better person, that somewhere out there was this magical connection that was going to change me, and hopefully my wife would find someone who wasn't such a drain and drag on her life. And I wanted to set her free for a better life. A lot happened between that time and 2004. My wife and I tried a lot. In 2004, my wife and her family had already supported us through 2 different attempts at self-employment, and those didn't work out. I chose poorly, or I just wasn't able to do the social aspects that were required for an entrepreneur. Even if I knew everything else, or I knew the theory of how to behave, I did not successfully move those businesses along. And in 2004, it was back to graduate school again. I had taught at a local community college, and I was told that there was a path forward. So I entered Fresno State's master's program in the Master of Fine Arts for creative writing. And I knew from teaching part-time at the community college that an MFA was a terminal degree. And with that terminal degree, I could teach college. I might not become the high school teacher I wanted to be, but I could become a college instructor. and that was very appealing. It was another attempt. So within the first semester, I realized the MFA, that was not for me. I love writing, and I write all the time, but I didn't like the MFA model of reading and critiquing each other. You sit around a table and tell each other what's wrong with things, and not a lot of praise was being nurtured in some of the classes. And I think students, even adults, need both. Here's what was good. Now here's how you might improve this other section. But the negativity was really hard for me. So I discovered that that was uncomfortable. And I also discovered I really don't like contemporary literary writing as much as some of my peers. I don't like the surrealism. I don't like some of these strange, unreliable narrator, complex forms of writing. Not to say I don't like a narrator who is intentionally misleading, but these were books that I could not untangle in poems and other things. So, quite honestly, just give me pop lit and mass market fiction. I like that. I wouldn't mind being able to write it. And I prefer poetry that rhymes or has a structure. I just do. However odd that might seem to some of my literature colleagues or my English colleagues, I'm somewhat a traditionalist, I guess. Free verse poetry can be good, but I sure as heck didn't understand most of what was being read or written by my peers. I just didn't. And so I switched my degree to an MA in rhetoric, and that allowed me to focus on screen, stage, and new media. So again, I started to think maybe I could teach media production, stage production, film, audio, all those things that I loved could come back into my life through the Master of Arts in Rhetoric with an emphasis on stage and screen. I really enjoyed the cinema and drama courses. I just enjoyed them a lot more than I had the traditional literature classes. There were, however, still a lot of struggles. I couldn't memorize dialogue from a play as easily as others. I couldn't even always walk across campus some days without a lot of very serious pain. I struggled in some rooms with fluorescent lights. I got migraines again. And pushing through some days was it was so painful. In many ways, even though it was only a 2-year journey through the MA, again, my wife she was why I kept going. I owed it to her to finish this. All these costs we had endured, all these starts and stops, the investment that she had made in time and effort and money, and the investment of her family in us, I owed it to so many people to finish that program. And in this case, luck was on my side. For once, I stumbled into a really great mentor. He was at Fresno State only a short time, but he was there for my 2 years, and that helped me finish the master's degree. He was the professor who encouraged me to meet with disability services, to register as someone diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, brain trauma, physical injuries, the severe back pain from the scoliosis and everything else I had endured. And suddenly I was getting all these supports, including, if I needed it, a golf cart to get across campus when I was having a bad day, change in rooms to a more natural light instead of the fluorescent light. Things just got a lot better because I had a mentor who told me I could get these things. And I don't believe every disabled student has someone there to tell them you can get what you need for success, especially if it's a minor change like a room with more windows for natural light instead of fluorescent light. Someone who knew that was a revelation. And it was the first time in my life I had registered as disabled and received these little tiny supports that made such a big difference in my ability to perform as a student and as an instructor. After I graduated from Fresno State with distinction, with a 4.0 and honors, I was very proud. My wife and we remarried, which I don't know why she has stuck with me as a friend. Obviously, I just don't, but she did. And it means the world to me that she decided to move from California all the way to Minnesota, where I had been offered a fellowship in rhetoric. And at Minnesota, it was rhetoric, scientific, and technical communication. And again, my goal was to continue writing about and with computers, definitely more focused on technology and online spaces. I was going to look at how new media, again, audio and video, could be used online to teach and to explore new ideas. So I could study how we use computers to create text and other works. And it felt like I had a chance to get back to what I loved. Of course it did. This was another chance. And yet, the University of Minnesota experience was horrible. There is no other way to describe it from my perspective. It was everything that the USC School of Education had been, that the first high school permanent job had been. It was all those things and worse. The only difference is that my wife was with me, and without her, I would have quit and walked away from everything that first year, maybe that first semester. There was the job lost in the tutoring center because I made people uncomfortable. I would tap my cane when I was in pain, and I was told to stop it during an interview for tutoring. I was called a gimp one day in the building. I was called a gimp one day in the building where tutoring was housed, and I don't know who said it, but it just added to that frustration, and it was incredibly demoralizing. There was a meeting with a faculty member who said I was a lot of extra effort, that I was smart, but I was complex. And my wife was with me at that meeting, and that was frustrating and demoralizing as I was trying to seek help navigating this new institution in a new city in a new state with no friends, just my wife. And I was trying to understand how things worked. And here I was being told by a faculty member, I'm extra effort. Then, as I was still taking coursework towards the PhD, there was an expulsion hearing. A faculty member, she claimed that she claimed she was afraid of me. It was a very long process. The diversity office and a dean intervened, and thankfully I was able to continue at the University of Minnesota, but I was so incredibly depressed, it was difficult to function. There were changes in advisors, changes in classes. When I found that one of my professors told me I needed to smile more, and I dropped her class. She told me I didn't understand how people think. I needed to have a better attitude. I needed to be more inviting and friendly. She didn't like my flat tone of voice, which I have when I'm nervous. She didn't like my anxiety. So I dropped her class, and she has passed away, but she was a favorite of so many people. And yet I found her trying to change me and tell me to be what I couldn't be was hurtful. And it just went on and on. Changes in advisors, changes in committee members. It just always felt like I was struggling to stay afloat in Minnesota. So the university, at the request of the department in the university, I was evaluated for, I don't know what they wanted to find, but I was evaluated by a neuropsychologist in 2007, and my diagnosis became high-functioning autism. I was asked to meet with a university counselor, and that was a total waste of time and counterproductive yet again. I don't understand what's wrong with therapists in some ways. This was once again an aspiring, I assume, therapist specializing in education. But once again, the therapists seem to blame a lot of things that I don't blame, and I just found it was counterproductive. So at some point I canceled the future visits, and I don't recall exactly what was said, but I know it related back to my connections or lack thereof with people, or maybe my unusual, as he described it, relationship with my wife. And I don't understand that. My wife and I are not warm and fuzzy, cuddly people, but I'm now just really tired of people who say that we must not have a good relationship because we don't show public displays of affection or do things people expect. And it was really none of his business, and I felt the same way I had about the counselor back in California who had put me on medications. Anyway, I don't remember everything, and it's probably for the best that I don't require knowledge of everything that happened in Minnesota. Minnesota's parts of it are best forgotten, and that's fine with me. So I did eventually receive a job offer, and we relocated from Minnesota to Pennsylvania, to Western Pennsylvania. That job seemed to go well at first, and then the bullying and the demands, the situation became very toxic very quickly, with what people said were jokes about how I am. And there were a lot of problems for me. And I, again, was advised that maybe moving on was for the best, that it was nothing personal, but I was not a good match for the institution and the English department. I pointed out that this was clearly related to my disability, so we reached an agreement where I did some research and left daily teaching on campus. I am torn. I am thankful for the fact that the dean allowed me to continue for a semester researching. I am thankful that I was able to teach, though, again, I didn't teach what I loved. I found myself in literature class that was very difficult to teach for one term. I don't know what it is, but again, that bullying that comes across as jokes, the line I most remember is, "We don't need no autistics here." And it was said by a professor. Everyone says jokes. That's his humor with students and faculty. But it was another red flag. I don't want to be joked about. I don't want to be treated that way. My very positive initial reviews as a teacher and scholar became very negative. I got the sense that the department wanted me to exit, and so I did. The hostility of the work environment made leaving just a matter of personal well-being. And understand, my wife and I had moved from Minnesota to Pennsylvania without a safety net. We thought things were going to go so much better, and here I was again, unemployed, now even further from friends and family in California, my wife and I alone, which is in many ways how it still feels, us alone. Thankfully, I landed a second job. I served first as an adjunct and then visiting professor, and I loved where I taught. The position was made open for a full-time permanent position, but I did not get the post. I did not interview well. I did not coalesce with my colleagues in the communication side of things. And even though I was doing really well with the business school faculty and the undergraduate directors of business and economics, I did not mesh again with the humanities side, which was in charge of hiring for the full-time position, because it was considered communications and English. I was teaching business reports and technical writing, writing for economists, writing for business, but the hiring was done by communications, rhetoric, and English faculty, and I just did not mesh with them. They did offer me part-time again the next year, but because I had not received that full-time job, I felt it best to move on for my well-being again. So though I really loved teaching at the university and I enjoyed most of the students, not getting along with the faculty, the colleagues on the hiring committee, I just assumed teaching was again a dead dream, this time in higher education, and thought I would go off back towards the journalism or the media dream. To make my way back into media, which was the purpose for my journalism degree all those years ago, so long ago, I enrolled in an MFA program in film and digital technology. That experience was less than great. I ended up with a series of medical emergencies and a surgery that disrupted my studies. I was in a lot of pain. Navigating a very inaccessible campus was difficult. There were just a lot of barriers to success. My wife and I became foster parents. We had been unable to have a family. She had undergone cancer treatment. My health was collapsing, but I was going to get through this MFA program. I was dead set on getting back and getting a career before 50. I was old, I am old, and I wanted that career. Thankfully, as with other situations in the past, a mentor helped me complete the degree. He let me take independent study courses so I could catch up around being a new parent and physically ill. I had to pay for an extra semester, but now I had the MFA, and I could teach in journalism or media. It seemed like I had a chance to either teach in one of those areas or pursue a career, at least part-time. I was ready. So I applied for an assistant professor post that came up nearby, and it was the job I always wanted. It was a program with journalism and media production. It has a production studio. It has the gear. It has everything. And I didn't get the job. Nobody did. And that's not unusual in higher education because the line was canceled. Funding and other things always determine these job postings in higher ed. But somehow I did end up getting an offer from the English department. It was a fraction of the salary. It was just a fraction of a salary for the same workload, the same everything as if I had been a full-time professor, but now I was just an instructor. And so what had seemed like financially a good move, it has since proven to be very difficult, especially with the foster kids now that as we get ready to adopt and all these other things. It matters. So my current contract is for 1 year right now. I'm teaching courses I'm not really comfortable teaching. I thought I was buying a year while my wife and I waited for the adoption to clear. We have now been foster parents since 2015, and this is now 2019. There have been a lot of legal technicalities and other things, but I was sure the adoption would clear early in the fall. I'd re-enter the job market, and then we could move post-adoption to a full-time tenure-track job. And so a year teaching courses outside of my area would be okay. It would give me a year of still teaching and fill that hole in the CV. Unfortunately, the adoption has been delayed with the legal technicalities, and even though I am thankful for the job I do have, I know I never want to teach in an English department again. I now have tried English twice, and I end up teaching things that aren't easy for me to teach. The work is just... I have a very difficult time reading, and that workload of reading 140 or 108 papers, assignments, is just tortuous. I read so slowly. It is so difficult to get through those things, and I should have known that. I should have known if I read slowly, grading essays was going to be a nightmare. It seems self-evident, but I convinced myself I could somehow manage this 4-4 teaching load with over 100 students or over 140 students. And the reality has been I really struggle. I'm not getting a lot of sleep. And then you add in being a parent and everything else. It's at the end of this year, I need to call it quits. So once I turned 50, it was clear it's just never going to happen. I'm never going to be a teacher, not a full-time tenure-track teacher at high school and now in higher ed. It's 2019, and I have to accept that the dream is going to end. At best, I can freelance in media, do my own projects. Teaching journalism, photography, audio, video production, it's just not going to happen. I might get some gigs here and there, but the career with a steady job and benefits and a steady paycheck, that's not going to happen. Over the years, I have published academic articles, 2 book chapters. I've presented at a lot of conferences, just 2 pages, single-spaced of conference appearances. I've co-edited an academic collection that has been honored for its cover design. We worked with a brilliant graphic designer. I've done all the right things, and I'm going to be unemployed again in May. Every diploma and degree I completed was due to the efforts of my wife and mentors. In high school, it was my journalism instructor, a science teacher, and an English instructor. Those 3 men kept me going through high school. In college, it was the faculty and residents and 2 very good mentors at work in the computing center. For my MA, it was luck that I found someone who was at Fresno State for those years that I needed some supports, who knew that I could get supports through disability services. In Minnesota, it was the diversity office that kept me enrolled and helped get me through. Against, in some ways, my department and program. There's a lot that happened in Minnesota, including the Department of Rhetoric moving from the College of Food and Natural Sciences to the campus where it became the Department of Writing Studies, which was a traumatic shift for me because I went there for the technology. And there was the failure of the first teaching job as a professor, and then the second teaching job as a professor not being offered full-time because I was so unable to relate to my colleagues from English and communications. Mentors and my wife have gotten me through a lot of things. Most recently, the MFA. And maybe that will offer me something. It certainly helps with creating and recording this podcast and some other things I do to have up-to-date and current skills. But what I am, I am not a success. I am certainly not an academic inspiration story. If you want to know about education and higher education, as I said, I could write a very long book on this, but I am not good at education. I'm good at schoolwork. My reviews indicate I'm good at teaching because my enthusiasm for what I love is infectious, despite being considered somewhat distant and formal. But I'm a failure. That's what I am. I am someone who wanted to be a teacher who failed at it for the last 32 years. Asking me how to succeed in education or how to succeed and become a professional is asking the wrong person. I'm just Christopher Scott Wyatt, speaking as the autistic me. Thank you for listening.